Hi, I'm Erin, and this is Week 7 of Communications 101. George F. White, Director of Church Ministries at Camp Barnabas in Missouri, did a survey to find out people's feelings towards church regarding ministry to people with disabilities. This survey had 166 participants, and the results were that 21.6% had positive feelings toward the church. They felt that they were doing a good job reaching out to people with disabilities. While 30.1% had negative feelings, they felt that the church needed to improve, that they were not doing a good job in this area. While 45.1% had mixed feelings. So you might be thinking, well, those numbers aren't so bad. And they're really not, but they're also not great. Because the point is not the numbers. The point is the people behind them. The people behind them might be the family with the child with autism that doesn't go to church because people always turn around and stare if their son has a tantrum in the middle of the service. Or it might be the young man in a wheelchair who can't even get into the church because there's no ramp for him to get inside. So behind these statistics are people with real needs. Matthew 25:34-36 talks about the importance of serving the least of these. Whatever you do to the least of these, you did it unto me, said Jesus. This passage should really put the numbers into perspective for us. However we serve or don't serve people with disabilities, we're doing it unto Christ. So every church should be actively ministering to people with disabilities, according to this passage. In this presentation, I'm going to give you some practical tips on how your church can improve serving people with disabilities. I'll talk about removing barriers, both physical and attitude barriers that keep people from being able to come inside the church. I'll also talk about reaching out to your communities and inviting people in. And then I will talk about including people with disabilities in the life of the church. So you might look around your congregation and think, well, there's not really people with special needs in the church, so there's not really a need. That's not necessarily true. 1 in 5 Americans have a disability. That's 56.7 million people. So chances are there's someone in your community or several people that are overlooked and don't come into the church because of these barriers that we've built up. Fortunately, some of those barriers are physical barriers. Whether it be a wheelchair ramp, needing a wheelchair ramp, or needing to fix that elevator that's been broken for a while, or investing in assisted listening devices for people that are hard of hearing, or it might be a room for parents who have to take their child out of the service so that they can still hear the sermon. All these things are fairly easy to fix. If you're not sure what your church needs, just go online. There's plenty of resources to teach you how to make your church more accessible. One resource is johnnyandfriends.org. They provide an accessibility checklist that shows different areas that you can improve your church's accessibility. You can also ask people that you know with disabilities or people in your community how you can improve the accessibility of your church. Sometimes these projects can be overwhelming, especially for an older church that's kind of grandfathered in and hasn't necessarily met the most recent ADA accessibility requirements. And there's a lot of money that might be involved in improving the accessibility of your church. But when you start small and trust God's provision, it's very doable. It's possible. There are thousands of grants that are available. You can find someone in your church who's really good at research and have them get online and just do a search of grants for accessibility improvements, and there's lots of different opportunities out there. One of those opportunities is the Christian Fund for the Disabled. This is also through Johnny and Friends, and it's a matching grant program, so they'll match any donations from your church. And they will provide funds for things like wheelchair ramps and elevators, and even training for your staff if you're starting a special needs ministry. So it's definitely doable to improve the accessibility of your church. Another barrier is attitude. A lot of times in churches we get stuck in our ways and our traditions and our rituals and our comfort routines. So when a person with disabilities comes in, sometimes we are put off by the disruption, and we're not accepting. Some people are also just lacking in awareness. They don't understand disabilities, so they feel uncomfortable or inadequate. So that's why awareness is really important. These things definitely don't make for a welcoming church. In my home church, my pastor's son is severely disabled. He's in a wheelchair, and also he's mentally disabled and blind. But he loves being around people, and so he loves to sit in the service and listen. Except sometimes he'll be cooing in the back and making some noises, which some people might think is a distraction. I remember the first time that I went to a service. Philip was in the back during the service, and he started cooing in the back. And the pastor up front, he just said, "That's Philip, you'll get used to hearing him." He didn't signal him out, he didn't ostracize him, he didn't signal to his wife to take him out of the service. He just explained, this is Philip, just accept who he is. He's not trying to disrupt, he's just enjoying being a part of the church. This approach definitely helped the church to be more welcoming and more understanding and more flexible. And it made more families feel welcome to come in with their children with disabilities. So even though the church doesn't have an official disability ministry, they definitely serve people with disabilities because of the awareness that the pastor established. You can also raise disability awareness in your church by holding a Disability Awareness Sunday. You can invite a professional from your church, someone who works in special education or in a group home or in some kind of career like that can speak to the value of ministering to people with disabilities. You can, if there's no one in your church available to speak, you can invite a pastor from another church that has a special needs ministry or a camp that ministers to people with disabilities, and invite them to come in and to talk about special needs ministry. I had a Disability Awareness Sunday at my church when I was about 20 years old, and I invited the director of a camp for children and adults with disabilities, and he came in and he spoke about accepting people with disabilities in the church. He also brought along one of his employees who is severely handicapped with cerebral palsy. He shared his testimony and the impact that the ministry had on his life. And after the service, a lot of people came to me and said how moved they were and how they wanted to become involved in the startup of the ministry. These people had no prior experience. So disability awareness can really reach those people that don't think that they're adequate. Because you can't just have the special ed teachers and the people that work at the group homes and things like that. You need the whole church on board so that the church can be welcoming of people with disabilities. Exposure and awareness is really important. Now, once you do all these things and you remove the barriers, you can't just expect people to just come flooding in because they see your wheelchair ramp outside. You have to reach out to the community. So the first thing you want to do is take a survey of the organizations in your area, whether it's group homes or a day hab or something like that, and see how you can support them and how you can get involved. One really great way to get involved is through the Special Olympics. That's a nationwide thing, and if you go on their website, specialolympics.org, you just have to click on Get Involved, and then under that is Become a Volunteer. And once you click on that and scroll down, you'll find a program near me, and then that will take you to opportunities specific to your area. I took a group to Special Olympics one year in raising awareness of the church, and we just went as spectators. We just went and we cheered on the athletes. Everyone had a great time, and it was a good way for people that were maybe a little nervous to get their feet wet. Special Olympics has tons of opportunities, whether it's passing out water bottles or even coaching. There's probably a job for anyone of all ages. So that's a really great way to get involved in your community. Another good way is support groups, whether it be an autism support group or a Down syndrome support group. Just do a Google search for your area and you'll find these support groups that you can offer to get involved. Maybe you can offer to host one of their events at your building. And that's a great way to build relationships and to show that you care. And again, Google searching is really helpful to find the opportunities that are specific to your area. So you've taken down the barriers and you've reached out to your community. And a lot of people might think that the next step is to start a special needs classroom. And there's definitely a place for a special needs classroom, but that's not the goal. The goal is to invite people in to be a part of the body of Christ. People with special needs are often ostracized and not invited to be a part of community. They're excluded so many times because of their disabilities. That's not what they need from the church. From the church, they need to be welcomed. They need to be included. They need to be valued by their church. 2 Corinthians 12:18 through 25 says, "But now God has placed the members, each one of them, in the body, just as he desired. If they were all one member, where would the body be? But now there are many members, but one body. And the eye cannot say to the hand, I have no need of you. Or again, the head to the feet, I have no need of you. On the contrary, it is much truer that the members of the body which seem to be weaker are necessary, and those members of the body which deem less honorable, on those we bestow more abundant honor, and our less presentable members become much more presentable. Whereas our more presentable members have no need of it, but God has so composed the body, giving more abundant honor to that member which lacked, so that there be no division in the body, but that the members may have the same care for one another." So the key in this is the members of the body which seem to be weaker are necessary. That's the people with the disabilities that are overlooked. We are not just called to minister to people with disabilities, but to minister with them. We are not the stronger helping the weak, but together we complete each other. In your church, you want to create an environment where people with disabilities aren't just taught, but are also given the opportunity to teach. And they're not just receiving gifts, but also giving them. The best way to do this is through relationships. It's in one-on-one interaction that you'll find that the man with the cerebral palsy that may have difficulty speaking knows the Bible way better than you. Or that girl with Down syndrome that sometimes interrupts Sunday school with a tantrum is also the best example of unconditional love in your church. Or that gentleman with the cognitive disability might have the best tenor voice in your church. You need to get to know people, understand their gifts, and utilize them. It's going to require flexibility. It's going to require being adaptive. And it's going to require some creativity, but it is so worth it. It not only benefits the church, but it also benefits the individual. It helps them to feel a sense of belonging and value. Heather Peacock, who's a pastor's wife and the mother of a child with disabilities, said, "Welcoming people with disabilities is less about having special programming and more about gracious and compassionate people who look for ways to be inclusive and accommodating." So experience in education is really important and very helpful in starting a special needs ministry, but creating an environment of inclusion doesn't require either of these. All you need is people with a desire to build genuine relationships with others. So starting a special needs ministry can seem really overwhelming, but it's what we're called to do. Jesus devoted a lot of his time to ministering to people with disabilities. If we want to be like him, we have to do the same. We have to remove the barriers that keep people with disabilities from coming in. We have to go out. We have to reach out. We have to change our attitudes and our misperceptions so that we can be a loving and welcoming church. We also have to create an environment of inclusion that appreciates and utilizes the gifts of all people regardless of their disabilities. I started a special needs ministry in my church when I was 20 years old. I had no formal training. I just had 2 years at a Christian camp for children and adults with disabilities. I was also very timid and shy. I was definitely an introvert. So to try to do something like that was a big deal for me. So if God can use me, He can definitely use you. God does not choose the qualified, but He qualifies the chosen. Let me say that one more time. God does not choose the qualified, but He qualifies the chosen. So if you step out in faith, God will give you what you need to do what He has called you to do. Is God choosing you?